We don't realize that this technology exists all around us.
God is invisible, but we can see these incredible machines that he has made. And so that faith then inspires me to go back again and discover more of what the Lord has done.
Emily and I are really excited to talk about the intelligent design of plant leaves. Myself, I have a background in biology with particular interest in ecology and the relationships between different organisms in an ecosystem. Emily has a PhD in biochemistry, and so she's going to take us on a deep dive into the biochemical pathways that underlie a lot of what I'm presenting here at the beginning. So we're really excited to give you this kind of two-part presentation that gives two different layers of design when it comes to plants. And I proposed this talk when we were putting together the conference, and John West, the mastermind, said, I don't know, this is all about creatures. Can we really be talking about plants? And so that's why we entitled the presentation, Plants Are Creatures Too. They count too. So in this first part of the presentation, I want to start by giving you a little bit of a scenario. So imagine that you're a homeowner. You're home on a Saturday morning, you hear a knock at the door, and someone, steps up to your door. It's me. I'm a solar panel salesman from Intelligent Solutions Incorporated, and I'd like to talk to you about the possibility of a solar installation on your house. I just happen to be in the neighborhood. A lot of your neighbors are getting an installation. I've taken the liberty of walking your property. I'm pleased to say that your home would qualify for our latest and greatest panels. Do you mind if I share just a few of the features of these solar panels? I didn't think so. So let me tell you, so the first thing that you should know about is our panels are really special. They will actually track the direction of sunlight throughout the day, and they'll rotate to follow the sun and maximize their efficiency. They also, you may have heard that feature from some other sellers, but ours have some other special features. For example, if they collect any rainwater or debris or anything else on the panels during the day, the panels will actually oscillate to one side or the other at night to shed all of that debris and rainwater in order to flatten out the next morning and resume resume production of energy for your home. There are also some other features. So for example, if you have some limbs on a nearby tree that start to brush up against the panels during a storm, the panels will actually protect themselves by folding up neatly into a much smaller protective shape. And there's so much more. I could go on, but the most important thing you should know about our panels are lifetime guaranteed. And you know what? You don't even have to call into the hotline. If anything goes wrong with one of the panels, if it's damaged in any way, the system will actually reabsorb all of the essential components of the panel, and then a few days later, it'll start growing a new panel in its place. And by this point, you're going, okay, I think I've heard of solar panels tracking the sun, but I don't know about this growing a new panel thing. You would be right to be skeptical that that kind of technology exists, right? And yet, plants all around us are producing this kind of technology in the form of leaves that can do everything I just described and much more. It's absolutely incredible, and yet it's so easy to take for granted because you're just looking at a simple leaf. It's interesting. I see somebody left some visual aids here. Oh, I'm losing most of them. So we see these leaves all around us. Thank you to whoever set these up here. And we don't realize that this technology exists all around us, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is the incredible technology of plant leaves and what is happening at the biochemical level as well. So before we dive in too much, I want to ask the question you may be asking: what do plant leaves have to do with science and faith? This is a conference on science and faith. So how does this tie in? Well, I'd like to kind of propose this idea that science and intelligent design is a place where science and faith can really intersect and meet. And what I mean by that is that if you go back and you look at some of the revolutionaries of the scientific revolution, people like Robert Boyle, Isaac Newton, Kepler, Galileo, these were all men of faith who were motivated by their belief in God to go study the things that he had created. And so they considered it almost like an act of worship or an act of devotion to go out into nature and study the natural world and understand it better. There's one particular quote that I love. It's from Robert Boyle, who was a strict Sabbatarian. He respected the Sabbath. where he would rest on the Sabbath. But he wrote famously in a book called Of the Study of the Book of Nature, he said, "I scruple not, when opportunity arises, to spend some time on the Sabbath in studying the book of the creatures." He's talking about nature. "Either by instructing myself in the theory of nature or trying those experiments that may improve my acquaintance with her." Essentially what he's saying is that his study of the natural world caused him to have this awe and wonder at the one who designed it all. And so as a result, he said, "I have no trouble going out and doing my scientific investigations on the Sabbath. After all, I'm essentially learning about the Creator himself and being caused to wonder at what he has made." And then on the flip side, you think about people of faith. Think about the Hebrew authors, especially David, some of his Psalms, where he's reflecting on the beauty of the natural world and how that, again, causes him to praise. This is one of my favorite passages. This is Psalm number 104. And David writes here, he says, "You cause the grass to grow for the livestock and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. The trees of the Lord are watered abundantly, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted. In them the birds build their nests, the stork has her home in the fir trees. O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures." Notice that everything he just talked about were plants, and he's calling them creatures. So I'm just saying. So you see this beautiful intersection where the study of the natural world causes you to have awe and wonder for the Creator, and one's faith in the Creator causes one to go investigate the way that he has designed things in the natural world. And so that's why I think that intelligent design is this beautiful place where the two kind of come together. Now, when I said earlier that leaves are like solar panels, and I made this analogy, you may be thinking, okay, essentially there's some ways that they're similar, but are they really that similar? Well, let me just give you a basic description of what a solar panel is. You could describe a solar panel as a large array of photovoltaic cells that use direct sunlight to raise the energy states of electrons, thereby creating an electron current, which gives rise to the potential energy in the form of electricity. Okay? Just a basic definition of what a solar panel is doing. Now look at the highlighted words that I have there. If I were to replace those green and yellow words on the screen, you would have a really good description of a leaf, of a plant leaf. A plant leaf could be described as a large array of living plant cells that use direct sunlight to raise the energy states of electrons, thereby creating an electron current, which gives rise to potential energy in the form of simple sugars. It is a very similar technology in many ways in terms of what it's accomplishing. And Emily will give us a little bit of a peek into how it's using electron flow to accomplish this energy conversion. But you may also be asking, okay, so conceptually, a leaf is similar to a solar panel, but surely anatomically they're quite different. Well, sure, but there's actually some similarities. If you've seen a cross-section of a solar panel like this one, you've seen that it's got several layers of different materials, all that accomplish different purposes. It's got an aluminum frame, a silicon seal, a layer of glass. It's got the solar cells. It's got, of course, wires that are conducting the electrical energy from place to place. And when you look at the cross-section of a leaf, you see a similar thing. You see an arrangement of particular materials or cell types that are each accomplishing a different function for this technology. So at the top of the leaf, you have a waxy cuticle, this protective covering. You have the upper epidermis. In the middle, in the mesophyll section, you have the palisade cells where photosynthesis is largely taking place with its chloroplasts. You have the vascular bundles, which are essentially like the wires of a solar panel conducting material back and forth in the plant. And then the lower epidermis with all the stoma or pores that allow gas exchange with the environment. It's an incredible technology. It relies on each of these different cell types to do exactly what they were designed to do. And the amazing thing is that you don't just see that there's this one leaf type in the world and that somehow, evolution can explain how we ended up with this beautiful canonical leaf. What you actually see is that every unique environment around the planet has a different leaf type that's specially designed for that climate, for that environment. And so what I just showed you is kind of like a typical canonical leaf. But if you look in all these different environments, I've just shown a few on the screen, you'll actually see that there's a different type of leaf design for each environment. So let me just give you an example. Conifers, pine trees, any kind of needle tree has several adaptations or designs that allow it to survive in, for example, the tundra, a very harsh environment for the typical leaf. For example, these trees actually produce antifreeze proteins that lower the melting temperature of water to allow them to survive in these environments. They have a rounded leaf that allows snow and ice to slide off more easily. It has a waxy cuticle all the way around the leaf, so not just on the top surface, but all the way around the needle to protect it from that freeze-thaw cycle. And you could go on and on and on. And then you compare with something like an arid environment where you have pineapples, for example. Pineapples are a cam plant. They have specialized organelles in their cells that allow the plant to open up their pores only at night, to take in as much carbon dioxide as they can, to use that carbon dioxide to store carbon, and then during the day they close their stomata so that they don't lose any oxygen to the heat of the day, and then they slowly work through that carbon dioxide reserve to power photosynthesis during the day. So no matter where you go on planet Earth, no matter what the environment, the climate, you will find a specialized design in plant leaves. And so one verse that comes to mind for me is in the Hebrew scriptures in Genesis 1, it says that each plant was created according to its kind, and it produced seeds according to its kind. So the challenge when you're studying plants is not to say, how did plants come about? How did we end up with leaves? That would be too easy. The question is, how did you end up with every single one of these? Each of these designs specialized for their environment. Another dimension to the design of leaves that's incredible is the fact that they're constantly sensing their environment. So if we go back to that slide where it's showing the sensitive plant, you can see in this little animation that this particular plant, when you touch the leaves, when it feels the pressure of an herbivore reaching into its branches, it will quickly close its leaves, similar to what I was saying with the solar panel being able to fold up its panels. It will close its leaves to create the illusion that there's really nothing to see here, nothing to munch on, and the herbivore will then move along to a juicier looking plant. And you see this throughout the plant world, that that leaves are able to sense what's going on in their environment. Another example that some of you may be familiar with is the prayer plant. It's a common household plant. And there have been several studies recently that showed that the movement called nyctinisty, the movement of prayer plant leaves throughout the day and night, accomplishes several functions for the plant. For example, shedding rainwater that is collected in the rainforest during the day, shedding the rainwater at night so that the leaves can turn upright during the day and continue photosynthesizing. And one of my favorite examples comes from a study that I did of quaking aspen. It's a very important tree. It's a food source for Rocky Mountain elk, and it's a clonal species, which means that it propagates through the roots, and so you can have an entire stand of quaking aspen the size of this room or larger that's genetically identical. It's basically a single organism connected through the roots. And one of the things we studied was the way that quaking aspen can respond to the environment by sensing whether it was being eaten by insects, whether it was being eaten by something like an herbivore, a deer, an elk, or whether it was in an environment that was largely free of herbivores. And it would have a different response. So for example, if insects were feeding on the leaves, it would start producing new leaves that had a high tannin content, a chemical compound that would turn away the insects, basically. It's impalatable to the insects. And so that would be its response to insect herbivory. If, on the other hand, the plant decided or could sense that it was being fed on by something like a deer, well, there's no good in producing more tannin. The deer will just chew right through that. What the plant instead will do, it'll shoot up a new leader. So if we're talking about the young trees, it'll shoot up a new leader until it gets about 6-7 feet tall, just above the browse height of a deer, and then it will branch out and start producing new leaves. So it can sense the danger and start producing leaves at a safe height. And then in an environment where you have neither of those things going on, it will follow kind of a normal growth pattern and really flourish in that environment. So it's amazing that the leaf is doing a lot of what the solar panel is doing, but so much more, right? It's also sensing and responding to its environment. And then just a few more examples here. When I say leaves are solar panels, but also so much more, think about what else the leaf is accomplishing. So let me give you a few examples. Leaves often take on a particular shape. Sometimes we mistake them for flowers because they're very ornate leaves. And one example is the bee orchid that actually mimics the female bee, so that a male bee will come to the flower and pollinate and spread from flower to flower and help it propagate. Another example is transpiration. The leaf is actually as it's taking in oxygen from the environment, it's also evaporating water. And what that allows the plant to do through capillary action is actually to pull water all the way from the ground, through the roots, up the tree. It could be a 300-foot tall tree, and it will passively pull water from the ground using this process of transpiration. And that's all happening because of the design of the leaf, because of how it's designed for gas exchange. And I could go on and on with all these incredible examples. If we have time in the Q&A, ask me about disguise and plants that have been discovered that can actually disguise themselves as other plants, an incredible feat that we still don't quite understand. And then, of course, the plant is doing so much more even for the environment. It's capturing carbon out of the atmosphere, which is very important for maintaining the climate. It's producing tons of food material. It's regenerating the soil. It's producing shade for larger organisms. And then the incredible thing, the coup de grace, so to speak, of this technology that we find in leaves is that if you compare it to human technology, it's like the holy grail of sustainable technology because it's renewable. It's using basically infinite solar power to run all this technology. It's recyclable, meaning all of the material that it produces in these leaves can also be pulled back into the plant and reused in the production of new leaves through a process of senescence. And it's what we call zero residue. Basically, it means there's no waste. Any of the plant material that falls to the ground, leaves, limbs, etc., all of that very quickly becomes part of the soil and part of the ecosystem. And so, again, it's amazing when you compare a leaf to something like a solar panel. It's amazing to see that it's accomplishing a lot of the same things, but also so much more, well beyond anything we could imagine. It's like me trying to sell you a solar panel, and then at the end of my sales pitch saying, oh, I forgot to mention this solar panel is also a whole house air conditioning unit and a missile defense unit and all sorts of other things, right? Like, what an incredible thing that this one technology can accomplish so many things. So with that, we're going to dive into the micro level here. So I'm going to ask Emily to come up on stage here, and she's going to take us into the micro world of photosynthesis to explain what's going on biochemically.
Well, hello, everyone. It's great to be here this afternoon. Hello, Texas. I had the privilege of spending 6 years in Texas when I pursued my graduate studies at Texas A&M. So it's always great to be back in Texas. Howdy, y'all. So thank you, Daniel, for that incredible showcase of the macro scale design of photosynthesis. And now we're going to turn our attention, as Daniel said, to the micro scale. And specifically today, we're going to be looking at photosynthesis, which is the process by which plants turn the energy from the sun into a more usable form of energy for themselves that we sometimes call sugar or glucose. Okay, so sunlight is what we call a primary energy source. Let me go forward here. Sunlight is what we call a primary energy source. Other primary energy sources are things like fossil fuels, nuclear energy, wind energy, and hydropower. Now what I mean by primary is these are like raw forms of energy. They're types of energy that haven't yet been converted or transformed. And then what secondary energy sources are they are forms of energy that are actually more usable for end purposes. For example, something like electricity. Now, electricity is something that you can use to power your microwave, you can use it to power your cell phone or your TV, right? It's usable for lots of different end applications. So we have these two forms, primary and secondary, of energy. Now, in order to convert a primary energy source into a secondary energy source, you need two little magical words, machines and engineering, okay? So you need engineering. Let's just take wind energy, for example. In order to convert wind energy into electricity, you have to have lots of engineering, right, to build a machine that we call a wind turbine. And then that wind turbine is able to, in an efficient, controlled way, convert wind energy into electricity. Now, this turns out to also be true for biology. So in biology, in the process of photosynthesis that we're talking about today, in order to convert solar energy into a more usable form of energy for the cell, like ATP or glucose, this process requires machines and engineering. Now, the design implication here is that the only source we know of that can create machines or do engineering is a mind or an intelligence. So photosynthesis takes place in a three-dimensional compartment that Daniel mentioned called the chloroplast, right? And that's shown here. The chloroplast is composed also of smaller subcompartments. We call these grana. And these grana are wrapped in something called a thylakoid membrane. And within that membrane, as we're going to see, there's lots of little molecular machines. Now, when photon energy from the sun strikes those molecular machines, what happens is they're able to convert that photon energy into a more usable form of energy for the cell called ATP. We're going to look at that process in more detail. And another important molecule that's created in this process is called NADPH. This is something that cells need in order to be able to build like DNA and lipids in the cell. Now, the second part of photosynthesis, what happens in this part is you actually take carbon dioxide in from the atmosphere and it gets fixed onto a carbon backbone molecule. It's something called the Calvin cycle. And then that eventually becomes the molecule that we love so much of glucose, right? So this is kind of an overview of photosynthesis. Now we're going to zoom in and start to see some of the incredible machines and engineering in the early part of this process. Okay, so here we're there now. This is the thylakoid membrane. And the first protein that we're going to be looking at is called PS2 or photosystem 2. This is a complex protein structure. It's composed of lots of different subunits, as we'll see in a minute. And it really is nothing short of amazing. So for example, did you know that photosystem 2 is the only enzyme in nature that is known to be able to split a water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen? That means that this little enzyme that's in the grana in plant leaves is responsible for producing over 99% of all the oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. So without this little guy, we could not breathe. So here's more of a close-up. So as I said before, this is a protein structure. It's composed of 25 to 30 individual protein subunits. So you see all those like ribbon-like structures there. Those are the protein subunits. And then interspersed between these, you see the green molecules. Those are called pigments. You say, what are pigments? Pigments are very complex molecules like this that absorb unique spectrums of light. Okay? And as you saw in that picture, you can have lots and lots and lots of them in this protein. Now, they're a little bit different, each one from another. And that's really important because it allows, when you have different ones, they absorb different spectrums. So here on this slide, I'm showing you chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. And these molecules absorb slightly different spectrums of light, and when you overlap them or have them together in a complex, that means overall the complex can absorb a broader spectrum of light. Now I want to talk a little bit about how this process happens, because it's really quite incredible. So when a photon of light strikes let me go forward here. When a photon of light strikes in this protein, what happens, like let's say it strikes towards the outer part of the protein, there's something called resonance energy transfer, whereby the photon energy gets shuffled from wherever it struck, the antenna complex, into what's the reaction center of this protein. So it moves from like the outside inward. And this happens extremely fast, okay? So this actually happens it transfers this energy in a billionth of a second, okay? And this prevents energy loss, and it allows the ATP synthesis that we'll see in a minute to be very efficient. Okay, so once energy reaches that reaction center, there we are, what happens is there's a unique pair of molecules. In fact, we call them the special pair. And when the energy reaches that special pair, it causes an electron to be ejected into what I call a biochemical wire. Okay, and this process, so photosystem 2, it nearly always transfers one electron when one photon is absorbed. So it's nearly a perfect energy conversion rate. So if that's not an incredible molecular machine, I am not exactly sure what is. So in fact, many years, scientists were really baffled at the efficiency at which this occurred. They were like, how does the energy get from out there to in here so efficiently? But in recent years, it's been discovered that actually what's happening is that the photosynthetic proteins, they actually manipulate the distances and the angles between those pigment molecules to enable the processes of light harvesting and charge separation to occur at nearly 97% efficiency. And you can kind of envision how this works by thinking of the pigment molecules like mirrors. That's why I have this animation of mirrors up here. So that when the mirrors are tilted at just the right angle, it causes the light to bounce off one to another and transfer the energy from one point to another in a really efficient way. Okay, another amazing thing about these complexes is that they are dynamic and they can change under different light situations. This means that when you have a situation of high light, these complexes can detect that and they actually lose some of the energy to prevent damage to the system. Just like solar panels wear out, leaves also will wear out. And so when there's too much sun, they actually dissipate some of the energy. Now contrast that when they're in a low light condition, they're actually able to harvest nearly every available photon to keep their energy processes going. Okay, let's go back to the big picture here. So once the high energy electrons start to flow through that biochemical wire that I showed you, and you can see it here in blue, as electrons flow, they are able to do work. And in this case, some of the work that they're doing is they enable these protons to be pumped from one side of the membrane to the other. Okay, so in this case, they're going from the stroma to the lumen. So what happens to the protons here is really analogous to what's happening to a water dam, okay? Just like in a water dam, you have the water upstream of the dam has a lot of high potential, it has high potential energy because it wants to get down into the river below, right? And that potential energy can be harnessed by, when it flows, it can be used to spin like a hydroelectric generator, and that's used to make electricity. And the exact same thing is actually happening with this in the chloroplast of the plant cells, and specifically for this thylakoid membrane. So what happens here is analogous to what's happening with the water dam. So the membrane, you can kind of think of this as like the concrete part of the dam, okay? And when you have all the protons like built up there on that side, they have a lot of potential energy in the sense of they want to get back to the other side of the membrane, okay? Now, in order to do this, there's only one way that they can get back to the other side of the membrane, and that is by flowing through this little nanoscale generator called ATP synthase, okay? So here's a close-up. This is really an incredible molecular machine. Let's see here. So this is a nanoscale hydropower generator, okay? It transforms rotational energy into chemical energy. Just like that generator in the dam transforms rotational energy into electricity, it is making chemical energy in the form of ATP. This little guy spins 130 revolutions per second. It's shown spinning kind of slowly in this animation, but it actually is going 130 times per second. And that makes around 390 ATP per second. Truly another incredible display of a machine that is brilliantly designed. Okay, now before moving into the second part of photosynthesis, I want to talk about the irreducible complexity of this system. You guys have heard that term thrown out around a little bit today. And so maybe you're wondering, like, what is irreducible complexity? So this is the concept that was popularized by Michael Behe that says that systems which require a minimum number of parts to function cannot be built in a step-by-step manner. And Behe gave us the example of a mousetrap to illustrate this. So for example, with a mousetrap, if you remove any single part of that mousetrap, you don't catch 50% as many mice. In fact, you don't catch any mice, right? And this is the idea behind irreducible complexity, which is that you need every single part of that mousetrap in order to have the selective advantage of being able to catch mice. And photosynthesis is much the same way. We can do a little thought experiment just now. For example, we have seen that photosystem 2, or the beginning of the complex, is required in order for generating oxygen and starting that electron flow. If you didn't have photosystem 2, you wouldn't have electrons moving through the biochemical wire. If you didn't have photosystem 1, which is the end point, or like the acceptor point for the electrons, there would be nowhere for them to go. If you didn't have ATP synthase, there would be no point in pumping protons across, because then you wouldn't have, there would be no need for a gradient to make ATP. If you didn't have a membrane, you wouldn't have any way for the protons to build up. So many aspects of photosynthesis are also irreducibly complex. And the design implication here is that irreducibly complex systems require a mind to accomplish the planning and the foresight that is necessary for such an interdependent system to be created. Okay, at this point, we've seen some of the beauty and the wonder of the first part of photosynthesis, what are sometimes called the light reactions. Okay, now I will turn to describing in brief what are sometimes called the dark reactions, since these do not capture light. These reactions, I should say, they're called dark reactions. They happen in light too, but they just don't require light. So that's sometimes why they are called the dark reactions. So in the dark reactions, as I mentioned before, this is where carbon dioxide is brought in and it's fixed onto this molecule that has a carbon backbone, and that's what becomes glucose. Now, we're going to spend most of our time today just talking about the very first step of this process, which requires a really important and indeed the most abundant protein on this planet called rubisco. So here's rubisco. Rubisco is really one of a kind. It has this incredibly hard job of pulling CO2 from the atmosphere and attaching that onto a molecule. Okay? But I want to tell you guys a little secret about rubisco. In many circles, especially biochemistry circles, rubisco has been touted as an example of poor design. And here's why. 2 reasons. So this enzyme is very slow compared to most proteins and enzymes. So most enzymes can turn over like 1,000 molecules a second, which is really, really fast, right? But rubisco can only turn over 3 molecules per second. So it is kind of slow. Second, when it gets hot, rubisco is not able to work as well. In fact, instead of binding CO2, it starts to bind oxygen. And so for these 2 reasons, people have said over the years or said that it's notoriously inefficient or sluggish, these types of words. I heard them in some of my own biochemistry classes that I took. Now, I want to make a slightly different case for this incredible enzyme. For over 50 years, we've been studying this amazing molecular machine, and no one has been able to improve it. Nobody's been able to make it better. All the best biochemists and bioengineers, you can imagine in today's world, we really want to be able to capture CO2 better. And so people have been working on this, but without success. We have not been able yet to make Rubisco any better than it currently is. So this gives us some insight that maybe the actual task of fixing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is very challenging, and that even though Rubisco is slow compared to most enzymes, and when it gets hot, it doesn't work as well, it binds oxygen, maybe it's just a really hard job that it has to do, and it's not actually poorly designed after all. For example, solar panels, they're using sunlight, they're making electricity, but they're not also capturing CO2, right? So it's a hard job to capture CO2 from the atmosphere. And what we've learned over 50 years is that Rubisco is pretty darn good. Okay, so this concludes our brief tour of the microscale of photosynthesis. We've seen how a primary energy source converts to a secondary energy source by engineering and machines, which can only come from intelligence. We've seen how photosynthesis uses advanced dynamics to achieve high efficiency of photon capture. And we've seen how photosynthesis has this irreducibly complex array of molecular machines, including the molecular generator ATP synthase. And we've also seen how a molecular machine in photosynthesis does what no solar panel currently does, pulling CO2 from the atmosphere. So where does all this incredible handiwork leave me? Having seen the engineering that's required for these molecular machines to convert sunlight into energy, I really am left in awe. And when I look at this, I know that someone smarter than myself designed this incredible system, having carefully thought through, right, and orchestrated each part of this so that all of them can work together to maintain this incredibly complex system. So just observing these machines really bolsters my faith in God, who is invisible, right? God is invisible, but we can see these incredible machines that he has made. And so that faith then inspires me to go back again and discover more of what the Lord has done. So thank you guys so much. And I look forward to taking any questions you might have.